I was standing at my cabin window watching the first real snowfall of the season when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. And somehow, I already knew this would be the beginning of something absurd. My name is Caldwell, and I had bought this beautiful piece of property in the mountains of Estes Park, Colorado about 8 months ago. The cabin was my dream, a rustic 2-bedroom structure with a stone fireplace, cedar walls, and windows that overlooked the most stunning view of the Rockies you could imagine. I had saved for years working as a software engineer in Denver before I could afford to buy this place outright. The plan was simple. I would work remotely most of the time, enjoy the peace and quiet, and live the life I had always wanted away from the city chaos. When I purchased the property, I had no idea it was part of a homeowners association. The previous owner had conveniently forgotten to mention that little detail, and my real estate agent had glossed over it in the paperwork. I discovered it 2 weeks after closing when I received a cheerful welcome letter from someone named Patricia Henderson, the HOA president. The letter came with a thick booklet of rules and regulations that I promptly tossed on my kitchen counter and forgot about. Big mistake. The SUV that pulled up was a pristine white Lexus that looked like it had never seen a speck of dirt in its life. Out stepped a woman in her mid-50s with perfectly coiffed blonde hair, designer sunglasses despite the overcast sky, and a pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She was carrying a clipboard, which in my experience is never a good sign. I opened the door before she could knock, mostly because I wanted to keep the cold air out. "Can I help you, Caldwell?" she asked, her voice sweet as artificial honey. That would be me. "I am Patricia Henderson, president of the Pine Ridge Mountain HOA. I believe you received our welcome packet." "I did, thanks. Is there something I can do for you?" She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "I am afraid we have received several complaints about your property, Mr. Caldwell. May I come in to discuss them?" I really wanted to say no, but the temperature was dropping fast, and I could see my breath in the air. "Sure, come on in." Patricia stepped inside and immediately began surveying my cabin like a health inspector at a questionable restaurant. Her eyes landed on the large stack of firewood I had been accumulating along the side wall of my covered porch, visible through the window. "Ah, yes, that is one of the issues we need to address. The firewood, precisely. According to our HOA regulations, Section 12, Subsection 4, no homeowner is permitted to store firewood or any combustible materials in visible locations on their property. It is a fire hazard and an eyesore that diminishes property values for all residents." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline that never came. "You are joking, right? This is Colorado mountain country. Everyone has firewood. That is how we heat our homes. I understand it may seem inconvenient, but rules are rules." The HOA board voted on these regulations for the safety and aesthetic appeal of our community. You have until the end of this week to remove all visible firewood from your property. And where exactly am I supposed to store it? That is nearly 2 cords of wood. I spent weeks cutting and stacking it. Patricia consulted her clipboard. "You could build a shed in the back of your property, at least 100 feet from your structure and completely screened from view. Of course, you will need to submit architectural plans to the HOA for approval first, which typically takes 4 to 6 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks? Lady, it is November. We are already getting snow. I need that wood to heat my home. Then I suggest you work quickly. Additionally, I noticed your woodpile is not properly tarped according to code. You have a bird feeder that exceeds the maximum allowable height, and your trash cans are visible from the road on non-collection days. I am going to have to issue you a citation for each violation." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. A citation? What does that even mean? Each violation carries a fine of $250. Given that you have 4 violations, that comes to $1,000, payable within 30 days. Failure to pay will result in a lien on your property. I felt my face getting hot despite the cold air. This is insane. I am not paying $1,000 because I have firewood and a bird feeder. Patricia's smile finally dropped. Mr. Caldwell, when you purchased property in this community, you agreed to abide by our HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. They are legally binding. If you refuse to comply, we will have no choice but to pursue legal action. I suggest you read that welcome packet more carefully. She turned toward the door, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. We have received noise complaints about your chainsaw usage. Gasoline-powered tools are not permitted on weekends or before 10 in the morning on weekdays. Future violations will result in additional fines. With that, she walked out, leaving me standing in my own home feeling like I had just been robbed at gunpoint. I spent the rest of that day reading through the HOA rulebook, and with every page, my blood pressure climbed. No vehicles parked in driveways overnight. No exterior modifications without written approval. No clotheslines. No vegetable gardens in front yards. No holiday decorations up for more than 30 days. The list went on, covering everything from what color you could paint your mailbox to how many pets you were allowed to own. But the firewood rule was the kicker. I read it over and over, trying to find some loophole. The language was clear. No combustible materials stored in locations visible from roads or neighboring properties. My cabin was situated on 3 acres, but the way the property lines were drawn, almost everywhere I could feasibly store firewood would be visible from somewhere. I called my real estate agent, a friendly guy named Mark, who had assured me this was the perfect property. He sounded apologetic but useless. Yeah, HOAs can be tricky. Did the seller not disclose that? Apparently not. That is rough, man. You could potentially sue the seller for non-disclosure, but that would be a long and expensive process. Honestly, your best bet is probably to just work with the HOA. Most of them are reasonable if you approach them the right way. I had met Patricia Henderson. She was about as reasonable as a rattlesnake. Over the next 2 days, I tried to figure out a solution. I measured out potential shed locations, but the ground was already starting to freeze, making construction difficult. Besides, I did not have 4 to 6 weeks to wait for HOA approval. Winter was here now, and my cabin's primary heat source was the wood-burning stove in the living room. I had electric baseboard heaters as backup, but they were expensive to run and barely kept up when temperatures dropped below freezing. On Thursday afternoon, I decided to attend the HOA meeting. They were held monthly at the Pine Ridge Community Center, a fancy building near the entrance of our development that I had never bothered to visit. When I walked in, I found about 15 people scattered around a conference room, most of them looking like retired folks with nothing better to do than complain about their neighbors. Patricia sat at the head of the table, naturally. When she saw me, her eyebrows raised slightly. "Mr. Caldwell, how nice of you to join us. Please have a seat." I grabbed a chair near the back. "I am here to discuss the violations you cited on my property. We will get to new business shortly. First, we need to approve the minutes from last month's meeting." I sat through 45 minutes of the most mind-numbing bureaucratic nonsense I had ever experienced. They discussed the color of flowers to be planted near the entrance sign. They debated whether the speed bumps were the correct height. Someone complained about a neighbor's dog barking at 7 in the morning. Finally, mercifully, Patricia turned her attention to me. "Now then, Mr. Caldwell has joined us to discuss the citations issued to his property. Connor, would you like to address the board? I stood up, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. Look, I understand you have rules, but the firewood situation is unreasonable. I need that wood to heat my home. It is safely stored on my covered porch, away from any open flames. Asking me to build a shed that takes weeks for approval while winter is already here is not practical. An older man with a white mustache spoke up. The rules are clear, son. We all have to follow them. Do you heat your home with wood? I asked. He shifted uncomfortably. Well, no, I have gas heat. Then this does not affect you, but it affects me directly. I am asking for a variance or a temporary exception until spring when I can properly build a shed. Patricia shook her head. The HOA does not grant variances for clear violations of safety codes. Your firewood is a fire hazard. It is wood, on a covered porch, in the snow. How is that a fire hazard? A woman with gray hair and too much jewelry chimed in. What if there is an ember from your chimney? It could land on that pile and set your whole property ablaze. Then what? It could spread to neighboring homes. Have any of you actually been to my property? My nearest neighbor is half a mile away. Patricia cut in smoothly. The size of your lot is irrelevant. Rules exist for everyone's protection. I am afraid the board's decision stands. You have until Sunday to remove the visible firewood or face additional fines of $100 per day until compliance is achieved. I looked around the room at all these comfortable people in their climate-controlled homes, none of them understanding or caring about my situation. This is ridiculous. You are essentially forcing me to freeze in my own home. You have electric heat, do you not? Patricia asked. That would cost me hundreds of dollars a month to run. Then I suggest you budget accordingly. Meeting adjourned. I walked out of that community center feeling angrier than I had in years. These people had no right to tell me how to heat my own home on my own property. But as I drove back up the mountain road to my cabin, I realized something. They technically did have that right. I had signed documents when I closed on the property, even if I had not read them carefully. The HOA covenants were legally binding. That night, I sat by my wood stove, watching the flames dance while I tried to figure out my next move. I could lawyer up and fight this, but that would cost thousands of dollars with no guarantee of winning. I could comply and hope to survive the winter on electric heat, and my remaining wood supply that I would have to keep hidden inside. Or I could move out of this property entirely, taking a massive financial loss. None of those options seemed acceptable. Friday morning brought another 6 inches of snow, and a temperature dropped to 15 degrees. I was adding wood to my stove when I heard a vehicle pull up. This time it was a pickup truck with Pine Ridge HOA enforcement printed on the door. A guy in his 30s got out, dressed in a security uniform that looked like he had ordered it from a costume shop. I met him at the door. Let me guess, you are here about the firewood. He looked uncomfortable. I am just doing my job, man. I have to document the continuing violation and post this notice on your door. He handed me a bright orange paper that declared I was in violation of HOA regulations and subject to daily fines starting immediately. You have got to be kidding me. Sorry, man. I just work here. If it helps, I think the rule is stupid too. Then why enforce it? He shrugged. Because Patricia Henderson signs my paycheck and I need this job. After he left, I made a decision. If they wanted to play hardball, I could play too. I spent Friday afternoon researching Colorado HOA law, reading through statute after statute. What I found was interesting. While HOAs did have significant power, they were also subject to numerous legal requirements and limitations. They had to follow their own bylaws. They had to provide proper notice. They had to act in good faith for the benefit of all homeowners. I also discovered that Colorado law specifically addressed utility services and habitability. Landlords, for instance, could not shut off heat or other essential services. While the HOA was not my landlord, there were arguments to be made that preventing me from heating my home was a habitability issue. But the most interesting thing I found was in the HOA's own bylaws, which were public record. There was a clause about emergency exceptions to rules in cases where strict enforcement would create undue hardship or danger. It required a petition to the board with supporting documentation. I spent Friday night drafting a formal petition, citing the relevant bylaws, explaining my situation, and requesting a temporary emergency exception until I could build a proper storage shed in the spring. I included documentation of my heating costs, the current weather forecast showing a particularly harsh winter ahead, and even got my neighbor, an older man named Bill who lived up the road, to write a letter saying my firewood pile had never bothered him. Saturday morning, I drove to Patricia Henderson's house, a massive log mansion that probably had 6 bedrooms and every modern convenience imaginable. I rang the doorbell, and she answered wearing a silk robe and holding a coffee cup. "Mr. Caldwell, this is highly inappropriate. We have proper channels for communication. This is a formal petition to the board under Article 7, Section 3 of the HOA bylaws regarding emergency exceptions. You are required to review it within 72 hours and hold a special session if requested by a homeowner in good standing." Her eyes narrowed as she took the envelope from my hand. "I will review this with the board. I am requesting a special session. The bylaw says you have to hold one within 5 business days. It is Saturday. That means you will have your session by next Friday at the latest. People have died from cold weather in less time than that. Then perhaps you should consider a hotel." She closed the door in my face. I went back home and did something I probably should have done weeks ago. I called a lawyer. His name was Robert Chenoweth, and he specialized in property law and HOA disputes. His office was in Denver, but he agreed to a phone consultation. After I explained the situation, he was quiet for a moment. "They are really fining you for having firewood. $100 a day as of yesterday. And you need this firewood to heat your home. It is my primary heat source." Okay, this is actually interesting. Colorado revised its HOA statutes a few years ago to prevent exactly this kind of overreach. Let me ask you something. Does your HOA's covenant specifically ban firewood, or does it use broader language about combustible materials? It says combustible materials stored in visible locations. That is where they screwed up. That language is so broad it could technically include propane tanks, gasoline for lawn mowers, even barbecue grills. Courts have struck down overly broad HOA restrictions before. Plus, there is the habitability angle. You might have a good case here. How long would a lawsuit take? Months, maybe over a year, and it would cost you probably $10,000 to $20,000 in legal fees. My heart sank. I do not have that kind of money. Here is what I would suggest. Send a formal demand letter to the HOA citing the legal issues with their enforcement. Make it clear you understand your rights and are prepared to fight. Sometimes that is enough to make them back down. If they do not, file a complaint with the Colorado Division of Real Estate. They oversee HOAs and can investigate complaints. It is free and might put enough pressure on them to be reasonable. And if that does not work, then we talk about a lawsuit, but let's hope it does not come to that. I thanked him and spent the rest of Saturday drafting a demand letter based on his advice. I cited specific Colorado statutes, pointed out the overbreadth issue with their rule, and made it clear I would pursue all legal remedies if they continued their harassment. I sent it via certified mail and email to Patricia Henderson and the entire HOA board. Sunday was peaceful. No visits from Patricia or her security lackey. I spent the day splitting more wood from logs I had stored in my shed, bringing my supply inside a few pieces at a time. If they wanted my outdoor stack gone, fine. I would move it all inside where it was not visible. It was going to make my cabin cramped, but I would manage. Monday morning, I woke up to find a new notice on my door. The HOA had denied my emergency petition. Their reasoning was that I had alternative heating methods available and therefore no true emergency existed. They also stated that my demand letter was threatening in nature and that any further harassment of board members would result in additional penalties. I was furious. I called Robert Chenoweth again, and he was equally annoyed. They are being idiots. Go ahead and file that complaint with the Division of Real Estate. I will draft it for you. That afternoon, I filed a formal complaint against the Pine Ridge Mountain HOA, alleging harassment, unreasonable enforcement of overly broad regulations, and actions that compromised the habitability of my property. The division acknowledged receipt and said an investigator would be in contact. Tuesday brought the first real cold snap of the season. Temperatures dropped to 5 degrees overnight, and the forecast called for below zero temperatures by the weekend. I kept my wood stove burning constantly, going through wood faster than I liked. At this rate, my supply would not last until spring even if I supplemented with the electric heat. Wednesday morning, I got a call from a woman who identified herself as Linda Morrison from the Colorado Division of Real Estate. She said she had reviewed my complaint and wanted to schedule a site visit to inspect my property and interview both parties. "How soon can you come?" I asked. "I have an opening Friday morning. Would 9 o'clock work?" "Absolutely." That afternoon, I got a certified letter from the HOA. It informed me that due to my continuing violations and refusal to comply with board directives, they were placing a lien on my property for $3,000 in accumulated fines and moving forward with legal action to force compliance. They were also suspending my rights to use community amenities, not that I had ever used them anyway, $3,000 for having firewood. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it were not happening to me. I immediately forwarded the letter to Robert Chenoweth and Linda Morrison. Robert called me back within an hour. "They are rushing this. That is actually good for us. It shows they are acting emotionally rather than strategically. Keep documentation of everything. Every email, every notice, every fine. We are going to need it." Thursday night, the temperature dropped to -2 degrees. I burned through half a cord of wood, keeping my cabin warm enough to be livable. I had moved most of my outdoor stack inside by this point, filling my living room, bedroom, and even part of my kitchen with neatly stacked wood. It was a fire hazard, ironically, but it was the only way to keep it hidden from the HOA's prying eyes. Around midnight, I heard a vehicle outside. I looked out my window and saw Patricia Henderson's white Lexus parked in my driveway. She was taking pictures of my cabin with her phone, the flash going off repeatedly in the darkness. I opened my door and stepped out into the freezing air in my sweatpants and jacket. "What the hell are you doing?" She jumped, startled. "I am documenting continuing violations for our records." At midnight, that is called trespassing. This is HOA business. I have the right to inspect properties for compliance. Not at midnight, you do not. Get off my property before I call the sheriff. Go ahead and call them. I will just explain that you are harassing a board member trying to do her job. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Patricia's confidence wavered slightly as I reported a trespasser on my property. The dispatcher said a deputy would be out shortly. Patricia got in her Lexus and drove off before the deputy arrived, but I gave him a full report anyway. The deputy, a middle-aged guy with a weary expression, took notes and said he would file a report. "Let me give you some advice," he said. "Document everything with your HOA. Get security cameras if you do not have them already. I have seen disputes like this turn ugly. It is already ugly. It can get worse. Trust me." Friday morning at exactly 9 o'clock, Linda Morrison from the Division of Real Estate arrived in a state vehicle. She was a professional-looking woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor. I had prepared for her visit by printing out every document, every email, every notice I had received from the HOA. She walked around my property, examined where my firewood had been stored, looked at my wood stove, and asked detailed questions about my heating situation. She took photographs and made extensive notes. "They are really fining you $100 a day for this?" she asked, shaking her head. "That is what the notices say. And you heat primarily with wood. It is the most economical option, and frankly, I enjoy it. That is part of why I bought a cabin in the mountains. I am going to need to interview the HOA board. Can you give me their contact information?" I provided Patricia Henderson's phone number and email. Linda called her right there from my driveway, putting the phone on speaker. Patricia answered with her usual fake sweetness. "Miss Henderson, this is Linda Morrison from the Colorado Division of Real Estate. I am conducting an investigation into a complaint filed against your HOA by Connor Caldwell. I need to schedule a time to meet with you and the board." There was a pause. "We were not informed of any investigation. You are being informed now. When is your next board meeting?" "Not until next month." "Then I suggest you call a special meeting. I am available Monday afternoon. This is highly irregular. We have rights as an HOA board." "Yes, you do. And homeowners have rights as well. Monday at 2 o'clock. I will meet you at the Pine Ridge Community Center. Have your complete records of enforcement actions against Mr. Caldwell available for review." Patricia sputtered something about consulting with their lawyer, but Linda cut her off. "Monday at 2, be there." She hung up. "That felt good to listen to," I said. Linda smiled slightly. "I have been doing this job for 12 years. I have seen a lot of HOA boards that forget they are supposed to serve homeowners, not rule over them like feudal lords. Your case is pretty clear-cut. They are applying an overly broad regulation in a way that affects your ability to reasonably use your property. So what happens now? I will interview the board, review their records, and issue a preliminary finding. If I determine they are in violation of Colorado HOA statutes, I can order them to cease their enforcement actions and rescind the fines. They can appeal, but most do not bother because they know they will lose. How long does this take? Preliminary finding within 2 weeks. Final determination within 30 days if there is no appeal. It was not fast enough to stop the fines from accumulating, but it was something. I thanked Linda and she drove off, leaving me feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. That hope lasted about 6 hours. Friday evening, I got a knock on my door. I opened it to find a man in a cheap suit holding a manila envelope. "Connor Caldwell, yes, you have been served." He shoved the envelope into my hands and walked away. Inside was a lawsuit. The Pine Ridge Mountain HOA was suing me for injunctive relief, demanding a court order forcing me to comply with their regulations and pay all accumulated fines, which now totaled $3,800. The court date was set for 3 weeks away. I called Robert Chenoweth, interrupting what sounded like his dinner. After I explained, he sighed heavily. They are being aggressive. This is going to cost you more in legal fees. How much more? Defending against a lawsuit like this, probably 5 to 10,000, maybe more if it drags out. I felt sick. I do not have that kind of money. Can you borrow it? Family, friends. My family is not well off. I do not want to burden them with this. Then we need to settle. I will reach out to their lawyer and see if we can work something out. I am not paying those fines, Robert. I did not do anything wrong. I understand your position. Let me see what I can do. I spent that weekend in a dark mood, burning through wood and contemplating my options. I could sell the cabin and cut my losses, but the market was slow in winter, and I would take a massive hit financially. I could try to stick it out and fight, but the legal costs were mounting. Or I could give in, pay the fines, remove my firewood and freeze while paying outrageous electric bills all winter. None of these choices were acceptable, but I was starting to feel trapped. Monday afternoon, while Linda Morrison was meeting with the HOA board, I got a call from Robert Chenoweth. I spoke with their attorney. He is being just as unreasonable as the board. They want full compliance, all fines paid, and a written apology to the board for your behavior. My behavior. They are the ones harassing me, I know. I tried to explain that a judge is going to look very unfavorably on their actions, especially with the Division of Real Estate investigating. He did not seem to care. My read is that Patricia Henderson is driving this personally, and the attorney is just doing what she says. So we are going to court. Unless they come to their senses, yes, I will file our response this week. In the meantime, keep doing what you are doing. Document everything, comply with the investigator's requests, and do not engage with any board members. That evening, I saw headlights coming up my driveway again. This time it was Bill, my neighbor from up the road. He was in his 70s, a retired engineer who had lived in these mountains for 30 years. "Connor, I heard about your trouble with the HOA," he said, stamping snow off his boots as he came inside. "Word travels fast. Small community. I wanted to tell you something. About 15 years ago, they tried similar nonsense with me. Told me my satellite dish was an eyesore and had to come down. This was before streaming, and satellite was the only way to get TV up here. What did you do? I fought them. Took 2 years and cost me about $20,000 in legal fees, but I won. The judge ruled that their restrictions on satellite dishes violated federal telecommunications law. After that, they backed off me completely. $20,000, I said, feeling even more discouraged. But here is the thing. After I won, 3 other homeowners filed similar suits over different issues. The HOA lost every single one. It cost them so much in legal fees that they had to raise dues by 40%, which made everyone furious. Patricia Henderson was not president back then, but she joined the board shortly after and has been trying to rebuild their authority ever since. So she has a personal stake in not losing. Exactly. She sees you as a test case. If you win, it undermines her whole power structure. She's going to fight dirty. She already is. Bill nodded. Watch yourself. I have known Patricia for a long time. She is vindictive. This is not just about firewood for her anymore. It is personal. After Bill left, I thought about what he had said. Patricia Henderson was not going to back down easily. This fight was going to get worse before it got better. I was right. Tuesday morning, I woke up to find that someone had filed a complaint with the county building inspector, claiming I had made unpermitted modifications to my cabin. The inspector showed up unannounced and spent an hour going through my property with a fine-toothed comb. Thankfully, I had not actually made any modifications, so he found nothing to cite. But it was clear who had made the complaint. Wednesday. I received a letter from my insurance company stating they had received information that I was storing excessive combustible materials in my home, and that my policy might be voided if I did not remedy the situation immediately. I called them and explained that I was heating with wood, which was normal and expected for a mountain cabin. They said they would send an inspector to verify. Thursday, someone reported my truck to the sheriff's office, claiming it had expired registration. It did not, but I still had to deal with a deputy showing up to verify my tags were current. Every single day brought a new harassment, a new complaint, a new problem. Patricia Henderson was using every tool at her disposal to make my life miserable, and I was starting to crack under the pressure. Friday afternoon, Linda Morrison called me. "I have completed my preliminary investigation. I am ruling in your favor." Relief flooded through me. Really? The HOA's regulation on combustible materials is overly broad and unreasonably applied. They are selectively enforcing it against you while ignoring similar situations with other homeowners. I found 3 other properties with visible firewood, propane tanks, and other combustible materials, none of which have been cited. That is discriminatory enforcement. So what happens now? I am ordering them to cease all enforcement actions against you, rescind all fines, and remove the lien from your property. They have 10 business days to comply or face penalties from this office. What about their lawsuit? That is outside my jurisdiction, but your attorney can use my finding in court. It will significantly strengthen your case. I thanked her profusely and immediately called Robert Chenoweth. He was thrilled. "This is exactly what we needed. I will file this with the court immediately." It does not guarantee we will win, but it puts tremendous pressure on them to drop the suit. Will they? If they are smart, yes. If they are stubborn, we will beat them in court and probably get attorney's fees awarded against them. Monday came, and the HOA's deadline to comply with the Division of Real Estate's order arrived. I checked my email obsessively all day. Nothing. I called Robert at 5 o'clock. "They have not complied," he said. "I am filing a motion with the court to dismiss their lawsuit and award sanctions against them for frivolous litigation. This is going to get expensive for them." Tuesday morning, I finally got an email from the HOA's attorney. It was brief and professional, stating that the HOA would be complying with the Division of Real Estate's order within the required time frame, and that they were voluntarily dismissing their lawsuit without prejudice. Without prejudice means they could potentially refile later, Robert explained when I called him. But given the circumstances, that is extremely unlikely. You won, Connor. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt exhausted. The fight had drained me emotionally and financially. I had spent thousands on legal fees, dealt with weeks of harassment, and burned through wood at an unsustainable rate because I had been afraid to restock my outdoor supply. Wednesday afternoon, I received a formal letter from the HOA. It stated that all fines against my property were rescinded, the lien was removed, and I was no longer in violation of any regulations. It was signed by Patricia Henderson, but there was no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just bare minimum compliance. I should have let it go. I should have moved on and enjoyed my victory, but I could not stop thinking about what Bill had told me. Patricia Henderson had made this personal. She had harassed me, filed false complaints, and tried to destroy me financially because I had dared to challenge her authority. She was not going to stop. She would just wait for the next opportunity, the next perceived violation, and start the whole process over again. I needed to end this permanently. Thursday morning, I started making phone calls. I contacted every homeowner in the Pine Ridge Mountain HOA that I could find, which was about 60 properties. I introduced myself, explained what had happened with the Firewood situation, and asked if they had experienced similar problems with the HOA. The stories I heard were infuriating. An elderly couple had been fined repeatedly for having their grandchildren's toys visible in their yard. A young family was cited because their mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Someone else had been threatened with legal action because their dog barked during the day while they were at work. Nearly everyone I spoke with had some complaint about Patricia Henderson and her aggressive enforcement tactics. But they all felt helpless. Fighting the HOA was expensive and time-consuming, and most people just paid the fines and complied rather than risk escalation. What if we worked together? I asked each person. What if we petitioned to remove Patricia Henderson from the board? The HOA bylaws allowed for the recall of board members with a petition signed by 30% of homeowners and a subsequent vote. If we could organize enough people, we could force Patricia out. By Friday, I had commitments from 25 homeowners, which was just over 40% of the community. More than enough to trigger a recall vote. I spent the weekend drafting a formal petition, citing the Division of Real Estate's finding against the HOA, Patricia's pattern of harassment and discriminatory enforcement, and the numerous complaints from other homeowners. Monday morning, I delivered the petition to the HOA board along with all the required signatures. By law, they had to schedule a special meeting within 30 days to vote on the recall. Patricia Henderson called me that evening. Her voice was shaking with barely controlled rage. "You have no idea what you have started." "I know exactly what I have started. You have been abusing your position for years, and it is going to end." "That investigation was flawed. We followed all proper procedures. You selectively enforced regulations to punish me for challenging you." "That is not proper procedure. That is harassment. I will fight this recall. I have supporters on this board and in this community." "Then let's put it to a vote and see who wins." She hung up on me. The next 3 weeks were intense. Patricia and her allies on the board launched a campaign to discredit me and the recall petition. They sent emails to all homeowners claiming I was a troublemaker trying to eliminate all rules and regulations. They held an emergency meeting to discuss my pattern of non-compliance, conveniently forgetting that the Division of Real Estate had ruled in my favor. But I had something they did not: the truth and a growing number of angry homeowners who were tired of being bullied. I organized an informal gathering at a local coffee shop in Estes Park, and 30 people showed up. We shared our stories, compared notes on Patricia's tactics, and strategized for the recall vote. The day of the special meeting arrived. It was held at the Pine Ridge Community Center, and the parking lot was packed. I had never seen this many homeowners at a meeting before. The small conference room was standing room only. Patricia called the meeting to order, looking pale and stressed. "We are here to vote on a petition to recall me as HOA president. Before we vote, I would like to make a statement." She stood and addressed the room, her voice steady but her hands trembling. "I have served this community for 8 years as a board member and 5 years as president. Everything I have done has been in service of maintaining our property values and quality of life. Mr. Caldwell's petition is based on a single incident that has been blown out of proportion. The Division of Real Estate's finding was flawed and did not take into account the full context of our regulations." She continued for another 10 minutes, painting herself as a dedicated volunteer who was being persecuted for doing her job. A few people nodded along, but I could see that most of the room was not buying it. When she finished, the board secretary asked if anyone else wanted to speak. I stood up. "My name is Connor Caldwell, and I am not here to attack Patricia Henderson personally. I am here because our HOA has lost sight of its purpose. We are supposed to be a community organization that serves homeowners, not a dictatorship that punishes people for minor violations. I went through the timeline of events, from the initial Firewood citation to the harassment and false complaints. I showed copies of the Division of Real Estate's finding. I read testimonials from other homeowners who had been similarly targeted. This is not about one incident, I said. This is about a pattern of behavior that has made living in this community stressful and expensive for many of us. We deserve better leadership. When I sat down, several other homeowners stood to speak. The elderly couple talked about being fined for their grandchildren's toys. The young family described the anxiety of constantly worrying about violations. Someone else brought up how HOA dues had increased dramatically under Patricia's leadership, while services had decreased. By the time we got to the vote, the outcome was clear. Patricia Henderson was recalled by a vote of 41-14. She would have to step down immediately, and the board would hold elections for a new president within 60 days. Patricia gathered her things in silence, her face red and her eyes shining with unshed tears. As she walked toward the exit, she stopped next to me. "You will regret this," she said quietly. "I really do not think I will." She left, and the room erupted in conversation. People were excited, relieved, and already talking about other changes they wanted to see in the HOA. For the first time since I had bought my cabin, I felt like I was actually part of a community rather than a target. Over the next few weeks, things changed rapidly. The board appointed a temporary president, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret who had a reputation for being fair and practical. One of her first acts was to form a committee to review all HOA regulations and recommend changes. The Firewood rule was eliminated entirely, replaced with common sense guidelines about keeping combustible materials away from structures and maintaining fire safety. The committee also removed or modified dozens of other overly restrictive rules that had been causing problems for homeowners. I was elected to the board in the special election, along with several other homeowners who wanted to see real change. We focused on making the HOA actually serve the community, organizing neighborhood events, maintaining common areas, and helping homeowners rather than harassing them. But Patricia Henderson was not done. In late January, I started hearing rumors that she was consulting with attorneys about suing the HOA for wrongful termination and defamation. She claimed that the recall had been orchestrated through false statements and that her reputation had been damaged. Robert Chenoweth, who had become my regular attorney at this point, was not worried. "She is venting. Board members serve at the pleasure of the homeowners. You can recall them for any reason or no reason at all. She has no case." But she could still file a lawsuit just to be vindictive. She could, but it would be dismissed quickly, and if she does, we can counter-sue for attorney's fees. February brought a series of mysterious incidents. Someone vandalized the HOA's entrance sign with spray paint. The community center was broken into, though nothing was stolen. Several homeowners reported strange phone calls at odd hours, with no one speaking on the other end. I could not prove Patricia was behind any of it, but the timing was suspicious. Bill, my neighbor, suggested installing security cameras, which I had been meaning to do anyway. I set up a system that covered my driveway and the perimeter of my property. In early March, the cameras paid off. At 2 in the morning, I was alerted to motion on my driveway. I checked the feed and saw Patricia Henderson's white Lexus parked near my woodpile. She was out of the car, pouring something from a red container onto my carefully stacked firewood, gasoline. She was pouring gasoline on my firewood. I immediately called 911 while watching the feed. Patricia pulled out a lighter and I saw the flick of flame. She was going to burn my firewood pile and possibly my cabin with it. "Drop it," I shouted, bursting out my front door. The sudden noise startled her, and she dropped the lighter. It landed in the snow a few feet away from the gasoline-soaked wood. She stared at me like a deer in headlights, then turned and ran for her car. But I heard sirens in the distance already. The sheriff's department was close, probably because I was not the first call they had gotten about suspicious activity in the area. 2 sheriff's vehicles pulled up within minutes, their lights flooding the scene. Patricia was sitting in her Lexus, trying to look innocent, but the evidence was everywhere. The red gas can was on the ground next to my woodpile. The lighter was in the snow. My security cameras had recorded everything. A deputy I recognized from previous interactions approached me first. "Mr. Caldwell, what happened here?" Patricia Henderson attempted to set fire to my property. "It is all on camera." The deputy went to speak with Patricia while his partner examined the scene. I could hear her trying to explain, saying she had just stopped by to talk, that the gas can must have been left by someone else. But her voice lacked conviction. After reviewing the security footage on my phone, the deputy returned to Patricia's vehicle. "Miss Henderson, I am placing you under arrest for attempted arson and criminal trespassing. Please step out of the vehicle." Patricia's face went white. "This is a misunderstanding." "I was not going to do anything." "Madam, we have video evidence of you pouring an accelerant on Mr. Caldwell's property and preparing to ignite it. Please step out of the vehicle now." They handcuffed her and put her in the back of the patrol car. A fire truck arrived shortly after to ensure the gasoline-soaked wood was safe and would not accidentally ignite. They ended up removing the top layers of my woodpile as a precaution. I gave a full statement to the deputies, provided copies of the security footage, and explained the history of conflict between Patricia and myself. They took extensive notes and photographs of everything. "This is going to be a solid case," one deputy told me. "Attempted arson is a serious felony." With the video evidence and the clear motive, the district attorney will have no trouble prosecuting. Patricia Henderson spent the night in jail and was arraigned the next morning. The judge set bail at $50,000, which she posted, but she was ordered to stay away from me and my property as a condition of her release. The story hit the local news within 24 hours. "Former HOA president arrested for attempted arson" was the headline in the Estes Park newspaper. It detailed the recall, the previous conflict over firewood regulations, and the bizarre escalation that had led to Patricia's arrest. The HOA board held an emergency meeting to address the situation. We issued a statement condemning Patricia's actions, emphasizing that she no longer had any affiliation with the organization, and apologizing to the community for the turmoil. Several homeowners who had supported Patricia during the recall reached out to me privately to apologize for doubting the severity of the situation. Over the next few months, I watched Patricia Henderson's life unravel from a distance. She was charged with attempted arson, a Class 3 felony in Colorado, as well as stalking and harassment charges related to the other incidents. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the district attorney's office was not interested in going easy on someone who had attempted to burn down an occupied residence. The trial was held in late May. I testified about the history of conflict, the harassment I had experienced, and the events of that night in March. The security footage was played for the jury, showing Patricia clearly pouring gasoline and preparing to light it. The fire marshal testified about how the fire would have likely spread to my cabin given the wind conditions that night. Patricia's defense was weak. Her attorney argued that she had been under tremendous stress, that she had not actually lit the fire, and that she deserved leniency. But the jury was not sympathetic. After 3 hours of deliberation, they found her guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison, followed by probation. He stated that her actions showed a reckless disregard for human life and property, and that her position of authority in the community made her crimes even more egregious. "You were supposed to serve your neighbors, not terrorize them," he said. I attended the sentencing hearing, not out of vindictiveness, but because I wanted to see this chapter finally close. Patricia looked broken, nothing like the confident, controlling woman I had first met. She made a brief statement apologizing for her actions, but it felt hollow. As summer arrived, life in Pine Ridge Mountain returned to normal, or at least a better version of normal. The HOA focused on actual community building rather than petty enforcement. We organized a 4th of July barbecue, established a neighborhood watch program, and even built a small park near the community center. My cabin became everything I had hoped it would be. I spent warm afternoons on my porch, enjoying the mountain views. I hiked the surrounding trails with Bill and some other neighbors who had become genuine friends. I worked remotely during the week and explored Colorado on the weekends. And yes, I kept a large, well-organized stack of firewood on my covered porch, ready for the next winter. No one said a word about it. Robert Chenoweth and I stayed in touch. He ended up representing 3 other homeowners in the community who had outstanding disputes with the HOA from Patricia's tenure. We resolved all of them amicably, with the new board taking a reasonable approach to enforcement and conflict resolution. One afternoon in August, I was splitting wood when Bill drove up my driveway. He got out with 2 cold beers and handed me one. "Thought you could use a break," he said. We sat on my porch, drinking beer and watching the clouds drift over the mountains. "You know," Bill said, "when you first moved in, I thought you were just another city guy who would not last a winter up here. I almost did not, but you stood your ground. Not many people would have fought like that. You changed this whole community for the better." "I just wanted to heat my home with firewood," I said. "Sometimes the smallest things turn into the biggest fights, but you won, and we are all better off for it." As fall approached and temperatures began to drop, I prepared for winter with none of the anxiety I had felt the previous year. I had a full supply of firewood, properly stacked and ready to burn. I had a community that actually felt like a community. And I had the peace of mind knowing that no petty tyrant was going to harass me for living my life. The first snow of the season arrived in late October, dusting the mountains with white. I lit my wood stove, watched the flames dance behind the glass, and felt genuinely content for the first time since moving to Colorado. Patricia Henderson was serving her sentence at the Colorado Women's Correctional Facility. I did not think about her often, but when I did, I felt a mixture of pity and relief. Pity because she had destroyed her own life over something so trivial. Relief because her reign of terror over the neighborhood was finally over. The Pine Ridge Mountain HOA thrived under new leadership. We revised nearly half of the regulations, eliminating absurd rules while keeping sensible guidelines that actually protected property values and community welfare. Dues were reduced by 20% after we cut wasteful spending and renegotiated contracts for maintenance services. Homeowners who had been disengaged for years started attending meetings and volunteering for committees. In December, we held our first annual holiday party at the community center. Nearly every homeowner attended, including families with children, retirees, and young professionals like myself. We decorated a massive tree, shared food and drinks, and celebrated the fact that we had rebuilt our community from the ground up. Margaret, our new president, made a short speech. A year ago, many of us were afraid of our own HOA. We paid our dues and hoped to stay under the radar. Now we are a real community, neighbors who care about each other and work together. That change did not happen by accident. It happened because someone was willing to stand up for what was right. She looked at me, and everyone started clapping. I felt my face get hot with embarrassment, but I also felt proud. I had not set out to be a crusader or a reformer. I had just wanted to keep my firewood and heat my home. But sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone. As winter deepened and temperatures dropped below zero, my cabin stayed warm and comfortable. I burned through wood steadily, replenishing my supply from the logs I had stored in my shed. On the coldest nights, when the wind howled through the pine trees and snow piled up against my windows, I would sit by my wood stove with a book and a mug of hot coffee, perfectly content. I thought about my first winter in Colorado, the stress and anxiety of fighting the HOA, the fear that I might lose my home or my savings. Those days felt like a distant nightmare now. I had weathered the storm, literally and figuratively, and come out stronger on the other side. One evening in January, almost exactly a year after Patricia Henderson had first shown up at my door with her clipboard and her threats, I stood at my window watching the snow fall. The mountains were bathed in moonlight, pristine and beautiful. Smoke rose from my chimney, carrying the scent of burning pine into the cold night air. This was the life I had dreamed of when I bought this cabin. Peace, solitude, natural beauty, and the simple satisfaction of heating my home with wood I had cut and stacked myself. It had taken a fight to get here, a fight I never wanted but was glad I had won. I added another log to the fire and settled into my chair. The wood crackled and popped, radiating warmth throughout the room. Outside, the temperature was -5 degrees. Inside, my cabin was toasty and comfortable. And somewhere in a climate-controlled correctional facility, Patricia Henderson was learning that some battles are not worth fighting, and some power is not worth having. She had tried to freeze me out of my own home, to bully me into submission, to make an example of me to maintain her authority. Instead, I had stayed warm while her entire world came crashing down around her. Justice, I reflected, sometimes arrives in the most unexpected ways. I had not set out to destroy Patricia Henderson. I had simply refused to be destroyed by her. In the end, that was enough. The fire burned bright and warm, and I felt at peace.